There is a place on Earth where almost nothing lives. 9 million square kilometers of sand and rock. Temperatures that reach 58 degrees Celsius. So dry that years can pass without a single drop of rain. The Sahara Desert. But 8,000 years ago this same land looked like this. Rivers. Lakes larger than entire countries. Grasslands stretching to the horizon. Elephants, giraffes, hippos. And humans, thousands of them living in permanent settlements, herding cattle, raising children, creating art. In the mountains of Algeria, there are paintings of people swimming, diving, playing in water. Today, the nearest permanent water source is over 1,000 kilometers away. What happened? Where did this world go? And what happened to the people who called it home? This is not a myth. This is not speculation. This is the story of the Green Sahara. To understand what happened, you need to understand scale. The Sahara is not just big. It is the third largest desert on the planet, roughly the size of China, or the entire United States. It spans 11 countries. If it were a nation, it would be the fifth largest in the world. And yet, for thousands of years, most of it wasn't a desert at all. From space, if you know where to look, you can still see them. Ghost rivers. Dried lake beds. Channels that once carried water hundreds of kilometers across land that is now pure sand. These aren't legends. They're geology. Scientists have drilled deep into the Sahara's ancient lake beds and pulled up layers of mud, pollen, and fossils. And those layers tell a story that sounds impossible. Between roughly 11,000 and 5,000 years ago, the Sahara experienced what geologists call the African humid period. For 6,000 years, one of the driest places on Earth wasn't dry at all. So what caused this transformation? The answer lies not in the Sahara but in space. Earth doesn't orbit the sun in a perfect circle. And our planet's axis, the invisible pole around which we spin, doesn't stay fixed. It wobbles, slowly, over tens of thousands of years. This wobble is called axial precession. And around 15,000 years ago, it began to shift the Earth's tilt in a way that changed everything for North Africa. Here's what happened. Today, the West African monsoon, the massive weather system that brings rain to the tropics, stops around the Sahel, just south of the Sahara. The desert blocks it. But when Earth's tilt shifted during the early Holocene period, something remarkable occurred. The northern hemisphere began receiving more direct sunlight in summer. This intensified the monsoon. And instead of stopping at the desert's edge, the rains pushed north, deep into the Sahara. Rain fell where rain had not fallen in 100,000 years. And the desert responded. Grass appeared. Shrubs took root. Acacia trees spread across the lowlands. Rivers that had been dry for millennia began to flow again. Within a few centuries, the Sahara had transformed. Not into a rainforest, that's a common misconception, but into a savanna. A vast, open grassland dotted with trees, cut through by rivers and fed by seasonal rains. A land that could sustain life. One of the most astonishing transformations happened in what is now the Chad Basin. Today, Lake Chad is dying. It covers roughly 1,500 square kilometers and continues to shrink every year. But 7,000 years ago, Lake Chad covered over 400,000 square kilometers. To put that in perspective, that's larger than Germany, larger than Japan. It was one of the largest lakes on Earth, a vast inland sea in the middle of what is now sand. And it wasn't alone. Across the Sahara, enormous lakes appeared. Paleolake Ptolemy in Sudan. Ancient lakes in Libya, Algeria, Mauritania. The entire region became a network of wetlands, rivers, and seasonal floodplains. We know this because archaeologists have found the bones. Nile perch, tilapia, catfish the size of grown men, crocodiles, hippos, turtles, aquatic life, in the Sahara. Not fossils from millions of years ago. From just 6,000 years ago. Within the span of human memory, if that memory could stretch across 200 generations, someone's ancestor fished these lakes. Someone watched hippos bathe where now there is only sand. But lakes and rivers don't make a story worth telling. People do. And the Green Sahara was full of them. In the Tassili Eniger Plateau in southern Algeria, there are over 15,000 prehistoric rock paintings and engravings. They cover the walls of caves and overhangs across 72,000 square kilometers. And they show us in vivid detail what life was like. People herding cattle, hunting giraffes with bows, dancing in ceremonial gatherings, women carrying children, families sitting together, and in dozens of sight swimmers, arms extended, bodies horizontal, clearly depicted in water, playing, bathing, diving. One image shows a person swimming with what appears to be a child on their back. Today, if you stand at these cave sites, you see nothing but barren rock and sand for as far as the eye can see. The idea of swimming here feels absurd, impossible. But the evidence doesn't lie. In 2000, a paleontologist named Paul Sereno was searching for dinosaur fossils in the Tenera Desert of Niger, one of the most lifeless parts of the Sahara. What he found instead stopped him cold. Human skeletons, dozens of them, poking out of the sand. The site, called Gabero, became known as the graveyard of the Green Sahara. Over 200 burials have been uncovered there. Two distinct populations separated by about 1,000 years. The earlier group, called the Kifian people, lived around 10,000 years ago. They were tall, some over 1.8 meters. They hunted, fished, and foraged along the shores of ancient lakes. The later group, the Tenerian people, lived around 7,000 years ago. They were shorter, more gracile. And crucially, they were herders. They kept cattle. What struck the archaeologists wasn't just that people lived here. It's how they were buried. With care. Bodies positioned carefully. A woman buried holding two small children in her arms. A man interred with a polished stone axe. Jewelry made from hippo ivory. Harpoons for fishing. Pottery decorated with intricate patterns. These weren't hastily abandoned bodies. These were loved ones, mourned and remembered. Paul Sereno later wrote, "We were in the middle of the most forbidding desert on the planet. And we were looking at the remains of a green paradise." So what was daily life like in the Green Sahara? The evidence paints a detailed picture. People made pottery, some of the earliest pottery in Africa. They used it to store grain, carry water, and cook fish. Chemical analysis of residues inside these pots shows they were eating aquatic animals, wild grains, and eventually domesticated cattle. They crafted sophisticated tools. Barbed harpoons for spearing large fish. Grinding stones for processing plant seeds. Microliths, tiny, precise stone blades used for arrows and cutting tools. And they herded. The Sahara was one of the earliest places in Africa where cattle herding developed. By 7,000 years ago, pastoralism had spread across the Green Sahara. People moved seasonally with their herds, following the rains, just as pastoralists do today in the Sahel. But unlike pure nomads, many groups established semi-permanent settlements. Archaeological sites show post holes, fire pits, storage areas. These weren't temporary camps. People returned to the same places, generation after generation. And they had culture. The rock art doesn't just show subsistence. It shows ceremony, dance, music, symbolic figures that may represent spirits or deities, abstract patterns that clearly meant something to the people who carved them. In one famous panel at Tassili, there's an image archaeologists call the Great God of Safar, a towering figure over 3 meters tall, arms raised, surrounded by smaller human forms. We don't know what it meant, but we know it mattered. These were not primitive people scratching out survival. They were communities, with art, ritual, memory, and meaning. But nothing lasts forever. Around 5,500 years ago, the rains began to fail. Not all at once. Not in a single catastrophic drought. But slowly, unevenly. A creeping dryness that spread over centuries. We can see it in the sediment layers. Around 5,500 years ago, the mud deposited in lake beds begins to change. Less organic material. More dust. Pollen from water-loving plants disappears, replaced by drought-resistant shrubs. The lakes were shrinking. In satellite images, you can still see the old beach lines, ancient shorelines carved into rock, now sitting hundreds of meters above the current lake levels. Each line marks a stage in the slow retreat of the water. And as the water retreated, so did life. Archaeological sites show a clear pattern. Around 5,000 years ago, settlements in the central Sahara were abandoned. Pottery production stops. Hearth fires go cold. People left. But why? Once again, the answer is written in the sky. The same orbital wobble that brought the rains eventually took them away. As Earth's axial tilt continued to shift, the northern hemisphere began receiving less intense summer sunlight. The monsoon weakened. The rains that had pushed deep into the Sahara for 6,000 years began to retreat south again. It wasn't sudden. The drying took roughly 2,000 years. But for the people living through it, each generation saw their world contract a little more. Imagine it. Your great-great-grandmother told stories of when the lake reached that far ridge. Your grandmother remembers when there were still fish in summer. Your mother can recall when the grass was thick enough to graze year-round. And now, in your lifetime, the lake is a quarter of what it was. The dry season grows longer. The cattle herds grow smaller. The distance to the next reliable water grows farther. This wasn't an apocalypse. There were no tidal waves, no earthquakes, no sudden collapse. It was a slow goodbye. Generation by generation, the Green Sahara was disappearing. So the people moved. Some went south into what is now the Sahel. Their descendants became the ancestors of modern West African pastoralist groups. Some went east, following the last rivers toward the Nile Valley. Some scholars believe these migrants may have contributed to the population that eventually built ancient Egypt. The timing is right. The final drying of the Sahara coincides with the rise of early Egyptian civilization along the Nile. Some went north toward the Mediterranean coast, where rainfall was more reliable. And some stayed. They adapted to the desert. They became masters of oasis life, of long-distance trade, of surviving in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The Tuareg, the Tubu, the Berbers of the Central Mountains. These groups aren't outsiders who wandered into an empty desert. They are the descendants of the people who refused to leave when the water dried up. Genetic studies support this. Modern populations across North and West Africa carry DNA signatures that trace back to the people of the Green Sahara. They didn't vanish. They dispersed. And their legacy spread across the continent. But before they left, some of them left messages. In the final layers of rock art at Tassili and other sites, you can see the change happening. Earlier paintings show lush scenes, abundant wildlife, people and cattle near water. Later paintings become sparser. The animals change, fewer hippos and crocodiles, more camels and desert antelope. The human figures appear smaller, more isolated. One of the most haunting images is a simple figure, alone, arms raised toward the sky. Some archaeologists interpret it as a prayer. A plea for rain that would not come. We'll never know for certain. But we know this. Someone climbed to a remote cave, perhaps one their ancestors had painted in for generations, and carved one final image into the stone. And then at some point no one came back. The caves fell silent. The paintings faded under dust and wind. The Green Sahara became a memory, and then, eventually, the memory faded too. For thousands of years, these images sat unseen. The stories they told were lost. Until the 19th century, when European explorers stumbled upon them and refused to believe what they were seeing. Could it happen again? So here's the question everyone asks. Will the Sahara turn green again? The answer is yes. And no. The same orbital cycles that greened the Sahara before will happen again. In roughly 15,000 years, Earth's tilt will shift in a way that could once again intensify the African monsoon and push rains back into the Sahara. But that's 15,000 years away. What about now? Right now, the Sahara is not greening. It's growing. Since 1920, the Sahara has expanded by roughly 10% in area, about the size of South Africa. This isn't natural orbital change. This is desertification driven by climate change, overgrazing, and deforestation in the Sahel. Lake Chad, which once covered 400,000 square kilometers, today covers less than 1,500. It has lost 90% of its surface area since the 1960s. The people living in the Sahel today are experiencing what the people of the Green Sahara experienced 5,000 years ago: a slow drying. A world that is becoming harder to live in. And just like their ancestors, they are moving. Climate migration isn't new. It's one of the oldest human responses to environmental change. The people of the Green Sahara survived because they moved, because they adapted. The difference is that today borders exist. Nations control movement. The world is divided in ways it wasn't 5,000 years ago. But the climate doesn't care about borders. And history, as always, repeats. There's a concept in geology called deep time. The idea that Earth operates on timescales so vast that human lifetimes barely register. The Sahara is deep time made visible. It's a reminder that nothing is permanent. Not deserts. Not grasslands. Not civilizations. 6,000 years ago, children swam in lakes that no longer exist. Their parents herded cattle across grasslands that are now sand. Artists painted their world on cave walls, never imagining that one day, those walls would sit in a lifeless desert, and future humans would stare at their work and struggle to believe it was real. But it was real. The Green Sahara was as real as the ground you're standing on. And 6,000 years from now, someone might look at our world, our cities, our technologies, our certainties, and struggle to believe we were real too. Because the only constant is change. The Sahara has been an ocean floor, a tropical jungle, a frozen wasteland during ice ages, a green savanna, and now a desert. Will be something else again. The question is, will we be here to see it? Somewhere in the mountains of Algeria, carved into stone over 7,000 years ago, is an image of a person swimming. Their name is lost. Their language is forgotten. Their people are gone. But the image remains. And in that image is a truth we sometimes forget. The world changes. Rivers dry. Rains fail. Empires fall. Species go extinct. But life adapts. Humans endure. Stories survive. The people of the Green Sahara didn't disappear. They became us. Their DNA flows in the veins of millions. Their cattle herding traditions continue in the Sahel. Their pottery styles influenced cultures across Africa. Their decision to migrate shaped the demographics of an entire continent. They lost their world. But they didn't lose themselves. And maybe that's the lesson. That when the rains fail and the lakes dry and the green turns to sand, what matters isn't the world we lose. It's what we carry with us when we leave. The Sahara was green. It will be green again. But for now, the sand remembers. And so should we. If this story moved you, there are more untold stories waiting. Subscribe.